liftoff. Again, the vehicle, satellites, and range are all also looking good for a on-time liftoff just over 6 minutes from now. Roughly half of the world's population, or nearly 3.6 billion people, do not have access to the internet. Last year, the Starlink teams worked closely with the Chilean government to install the first Starlink kits in Latin America. Both the Chilean government and nonprofit Enseña helped identify and connect 6 remote schools that lacked reliable, high-speed internet services. The first Starlink kit in Latin America.
So for those of you that aren't familiar with what SpaceX is currently doing, this is part of their Starlink system. So what Starlink is a giant satellite ring around the planet, like a big satellite constellation around the planet, and it helps beam internet down to the ground anywhere in the world. So it's not quite done yet, they're still building it, but all you would need is a little antenna like that on the screen, and it'll beam the internet back to your house.
Individuals or businesses to help ensure bandwidth for critical ops even during times of peak network usage. Deliveries start.
So that's what this launch is.
So if you're interested in reserving a spot, you can order.
They're launching 42 Starlink satellites.
So we are just under 5 minutes from liftoff.
So the launch pad they're using is launch pad 39A, which was the original launch pad that launched the Saturn V rockets that put men on the moon. NASA sold this launch pad to SpaceX a few years ago, and SpaceX retrofitted it for their needs. So there's actually like a crew access arm on that platform that they would use to access the Dragon capsule if they were using one with this launch, which they are not. So the arm has been retracted, so you won't see it out. But the strong back there that helps upright the rocket, you'll see there that's now being retracted. That helps upright the rocket and hold it in position prior to launch.
And you can see that right now that the clamp.
Because originally the rocket's on its side, and that strong back uprights the rocket on the launch pad, but it has to be retracted and pulled back so when it launches, the rocket doesn't get caught on it. But it holds all the like umbilicals and everything that help fuel the rocket and power it while it's on the launch pad. NASA spaceflight has a recurring Pelican in their shot. Nice.
Falcon 9 will be in startup. This means that the rocket.
So you see those two, that thing on the top there, that's the fairing of the rocket, which holds the rocket's payload. When it gets into space and it's no longer needed, those two halves will just fall apart. Like this, like a clamshell. They'll fall apart and then they will come back through the atmosphere and land in the ocean, and then they will be collected and reused.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
So they just finished loading liquid oxygen onto the first stage of the rocket. So you'll see a difference between this rocket and the rocket that we saw yesterday. The one that launched yesterday, that was its first launch and landing, so it was a perfectly clean white rocket. But this one, this rocket has been launched and landed before, so you'll see it's got some soot on it. It's like kind of got some black dust all over it. That's because it's been used before. You can't see it on this shot, but the other shot, you can see the rocket is like dirty because they don't really wash them off. They kind of just clean off the majority of it, and then they just leave it. Nope. This is a totally new launch today, Big Pig. This isn't a recap. The launch yesterday was at Vandenberg out in California. This is at the Cape. This is at Cape Canaveral in Florida.
Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
So the second stage of the rocket now is full of its liquid oxygen oxidizer. If you guys aren't familiar with how like a rocket engine works, you need a fuel and you need an oxidizer. So the engine can function in a vacuum of space. If you didn't have an oxidizer, the engine wouldn't be able to burn in space. So they either use liquid hydrogen or they use liquid oxygen as the oxidizer, and then you have a fuel. So SpaceX, for the Falcon rockets, they use what's called Kerolox, which is a ultra refined form of kerosene.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
At this point, both stages are beginning to pressurize.
Yeah, they've had
for
3 launches in
liftoff,
3 days.
and we are expecting the launch director to give the final go for launch here in just a few seconds.
Nice clear day at the Cape.
Launch director go for launch.
So if you guys saw before
And
they
with that
switched
call-out, all
views,
systems are go
when
for
they
launch,
showed the
listening
actual
to
launch
terminal call,
tower,
and watch as Falcon
you saw
9
the
takes
like
off 49
wires that were
Starlink satellites into
extended
orbit.
down from the tower. Those are the escape. That's the escape system
30 seconds.
for the astronauts when they use this for manned launches.
T-minus 15. T-minus 10.
It's a little bit breezy there today.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You can see the water deluge system there to help keep the pad from getting burned up.
Vehicle is pitching downrange.
Now it's beginning its pitch downrange to its
Chamber pressures are nominal.
desired trajectory. Because as we said yesterday, these rockets don't go straight up. They go up and then they go sideways. That's how you remain in space. If you were to go straight up and straight down, you wouldn't stay in space. In order to orbit the planet, you need to go up and then you need to pitch over
We are T
So you're
plus 40
following
seconds into liftoff. Falcon 9
the
has
curve of the
successfully
planet. And you
cleared
basically
path
match
39A
the
and
speed
carried
of the
our
Earth.
Starlink
So
payload 49 Starlink satellites into orbit.
I know, the amount of
Orbisco
research
began
is
to throttle
insane.
down the engines on the first stage in preparation for max
So
Q.
essentially when a
This is where the
rocket or a
vehicles
satellite or whatever
experience
is
the highest
is
amount
orbiting
of
the Earth,
aerodynamic stresses
it's essentially
during
falling
descent.
at the same speed that the Earth is rotating. You can see the grid fins there tucked into the side of the rocket.
And there was max Q.
So they just went through max Q, which is the maximum aerodynamic pressure on the
In about a
rocket.
minute,
They
we
actually
have 3 events
throttled down
happening
the
in
engines
quick
a bit
succession.
to
First
reduce
up
the
is
amount
main
of
engine
stress on the
cutoff, also
rocket
known as
until they get
ECO,
through it.
followed by stage
And once they're
separation
through that,
and
then they can
second engine
throttle the
start
engines
one, also known as
back up.
SCS1.
So the next
During
thing
main
coming up
engine
is
cutoff,
main engine cutoff.
This is where all 9 Merlin engines on the first stage will shut down in order to slow the vehicle down in preparation for stage separation.
MVAC engine chill has started.
During stage
So what they
separation,
do
the
now
first and
is
second
they're
stages
now
will separate
chilling
from one
down
another.
the
The first stage will
second
make its way
stage
back to
engine.
our drone ship
That's
in
a
the
Merlin
position for its
vacuum
landing
engine. They're actually
And the
chilling
second
that
stage
down
will
with
continue the third event,
cryogenically
which is
chilled
second
fuel.
engine start 1.
So when
This
the
is
engine
where the
actually
single Merlin vacuum
is
engine on the
used,
second stage
it doesn't
will
shock the
ignite
engine and the parts
continue to propel the second
as they
stage
put that
along with the
cryogenically
49
frozen,
Starlink satellites
essentially,
into orbit.
fuel through it. The reason that the fuel is
Three events
cryogenically
should be
chilled
happening,
is
here in
because the
about 20
colder the
seconds.
fuel is, the better it burns and like the more efficient it burns in the engine. And you can see as they get higher up in the atmosphere, the plume of the engine expands and gets wider because there's less air pressure on it. This is the stage separation. That's the first and second stage camera there on the left-hand side.
Stage separation confirmed.
There it goes. You have the second stage on the right and the first stage on the left. Now the first stage is doing a burn to move itself away and then begin its
Next start.
Fairing
descent
separation confirmed.
down to the drone ship.
So we've had successful
There's the
main
fairings.
engine cutoff, successful stage separation, successful
The first
second
stage
engine
there at the
start on
top, or at the bottom, and the second stage there
and
at the
then also
top.
fairing
There go the
deployed. On
fairings.
screen right now, you can see the first stage booster at the bottom of your screen.
So those
making its way
fairings
back,
actually
along with
have
the
little
two
like
fairing halves.
airfoils
They've
on
deployed.
them,
They
so
were
when
at the
they
top of the
when they
screen,
go
but
through the
they'll make their way
atmosphere,
back towards
they
Earth
actually
and be
pop
recovered
little
by our recovery
chutes,
vessel,
and they'll
Dove. As a
slowly
reminder,
like
those
settle
fairing
down,
halves, one
onto the
flown,
ocean,
one was flying for the fourth
and then
time,
they go and
the
collect
other
them with the
was flying
ship.
for its 6th time.
So you can
So
see
a
if you
couple of
look
views
really
on screen
close
right
at
now
that
on the right-hand side of
that
the
second
screen is
stage
a view of
engine,
our
you'll see those
single
like
Merlin vacuum
striations
engine on
that
the
run up
second
and down
stage. Those
the
Starlink
actual
satellites that we have
vacuum
been talking about all
bell
webcast,
housing.
those are located
They
on the
actually
opposite
run
end of that
cryogenically
engine.
chilled fuel through those little
On the left-hand side of
striations
the screen is a view
on
from
the
top of
cone,
our first
and that
stage
helps
looking
keep the
down.
cone cool so
Its
it
job right
doesn't
now is to head back
melt.
towards the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas.
There you
and
can
make
see
its
it better.
sixth landing attempt.
On the left, you'll see that the first stage is
In
now
order to make its way
orienting
back,
itself into the
first
right
stage has
area,
2 burns today.
and then it will
Vehicles on
begin
normal
its ascent, or
The
excuse me,
first is the
descent
entry burn,
down to the
where
ship
3 of
that's
the
in the
Merlin
ocean.
engines will reignite.
Right now it's
And
using
this helps
its
to slow the stage down as it
reaction
re-enters the
control
upper parts of the
motors,
Earth's
the little
atmosphere.
these little puffs
The
of
second burn is the landing burn.
of
This is a
cold
single-engine burn
nitrogen
that will
gas,
the vehicle speed down
little
rapidly
puffs of
in
that to
order
help
land on the
orient
drone ship.
itself to where it needs to be, and then
The
it
first
will
burn is expected
begin
to start
its
around the T-plug
descent through
6
the
minute
atmosphere.
and 47-second mark.
And it'll actually
and the
fire
second
its
burn is
engines
going to
as
be
it's
starting at
right
the
before it
T-plug
goes through the
6
atmosphere to
minute.
slow itself down, so it's not encountering as much aerodynamic drag. The more drag it gets as it's falling through the atmosphere, the more heating. So you want to like slow
So we
your
are still a few
your
minutes away from the next
rocket,
milestone.
your capsule, whatever,
Starlink satellites that we're
right
gonna be
before it
delivering
goes
today,
through the
we're gonna be
atmosphere, so there's not as
delivering
much
them
heat.
to low Earth orbit, and they'll
The
be
faster
operating
you,
at
you
about
go through the atmosphere, the more
550
heat there
kilometers.
is.
Most
And it
satellites
goes
are
down
at
engines first.
36,000 kilometers in altitude in geostationary orbit. And when satellites are farther from Earth, the round-trip data time between the user
So the
and
engine on the
satellite,
right
known
is
as
is
latency,
basically
is
the
much
same
higher,
engine that's on the
resulting
first
in poor performance for
stage,
activities
or I
such
should say
as video calls and
engines that are on the
online
first
gaming. Starlink satellites operate
stage.
at over
However,
60
that is a
times
vacuum
closer to the Earth
optimized
than
engine, so
traditional
the actual
satellites,
bell
resulting in
housing
much
on the
lower
engine
latency.
is larger, because it needs to be a little bit larger so the engine is more efficient
Continuing to
when
go
it's up in
well for both
space.
stages. On the left-hand side of the screen, we see some action. Those puffs of gas.
You
that
can see
is
the little like
nitrogen
cold gas
from our additive control
thrusters.
system. That, in conjunction with the grid fins that you see on screen, those help to steer and
The launch
orient
they
the
had
first stage
on,
as it makes its way back to its targeted
what was that,
landing
Monday night? They had a really good shot of it from the ground as the first stage was doing its maneuvers to get into the right trajectory. You could
We are
see
about
it from the
20
ground
seconds
with its
away
little cold
from
gas
the first
thrusters
of
just
two
like
burns on
puffing
the
and
first
moving
stage.
the first stage.
3 engines on the Merlin.
So
3 Merlin
the
engines
launch
on
we
first
watched
stage
yesterday,
will reignite and help to slow down
they
that stage
landed
before
it
it's
back
the
at the
denser
launch
parts
site,
of the Earth's
but due to
atmosphere.
the launch profile of this specific launch, they cannot do that. So they actually have a drone ship positioned out in the Atlantic Ocean that the first stage will land on. So we won't get as good of a shot of the landing as we got yesterday, because usually when it lands on the ship, the camera kind of cuts out for a second because of the like noise and the engines, firing as it lands. So you'll see the first stage is now doing its burn to slow itself down before it comes through the atmosphere. They're using 3 of the 9 engines on board right now to slow it down.
Stage 1, entry burn shutdown.
There you go. Finish the entry burn.
Awesome. That is one of 2
Now you'll
burns
see those
successfully
little
completed.
grid fins there. I shouldn't say little, they're
In
huge.
about
Like
a
they're like
minute,
the
we
size
have
of a
couple
car.
events happening
You'll see
in
them
rapid
start to
succession.
like
So we'll have the
pitch
landing burn
and
start
move
on the
as they
first
start to
stage,
steer it
and then as
once it
that
gets
is
into the
ending,
atmosphere.
and as our
Because
first
when you're
stage
out of
is
the
going to
atmosphere,
be,
those
attempting its sixth
grid
landing
fins
on
are
our drone
basically
ship,
useless. That's why they
we
use
are
those
expecting
cold
second
gas
engine cutoff
thrusters
on the engine that
to
you
help
see
move
on the
it
right-hand side of the
in
screen,
space.
followed by the call out for
All right, Dick Pig,
successful
take it easy.
warp flow insertion.
Thank you for coming. I appreciate it.
And as a reminder, because we won't have ground
Amazing
station
job at
coverage
explaining things. I
during
try.
the time that the
I
Starlink
try.
satellites separate today,
They must
we
have
will
lost
be ending our webcast
the signal.
after we confirm orbit of the second stage, and then we'll confirm deployment on our social media platforms.
You can see that housing is, the bell is getting very, very hot. But like I said, they run cryogenically chilled fuel through that housing, through that bell to help cool it down. There's
Just
very,
under
very
10 seconds
small
away from
threads of
the landing
piping
burn
that run
of
through it.
The first stage. For now, we are enjoying some
Stage 2 is in thermal
great views
guidance.
of the second
one
stage
landing
Merlin
burn.
vacuum engine.
So stage 1 should be landing any second now. There we go. Oh, that's a good shot
You
today.
can see that the drone ship is getting closer.
There we go.
On the right-hand side of the screen is that drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas.
AH1 leg deploy.
Ooh.
Does look like the video cut out for a little bit. And hearing some cheers here in Hawthorne.
Sometimes they lose
and
the
there's
signal.
Visual confirmation that
There we
the
go.
first stage has landed for the 6th time, and this marks our 106th overall successful recovery
All right,
of an
cool.
orbital class rocket.
So you guys saw
includes
on
both
that ship
Falcon 9 and
with
Heavy first stage
the
landings.
rocket is now landed on. They actually have
So
this
during
little
that time, we
robot now
also
that'll
got
come out
a successful
and it'll
second engine
grab
cutoff of the
the
second stage, and
legs
you
of
just
the
heard
rocket
call out
to
for
hold
good
it
orbital insertion.
as
And
it
as
makes its
previously
way
mentioned,
back
although
to
payload deploy
Cape
is
Canaveral.
scheduled to occur around the
Little
2
like
plus
robot.
15
It's
minute
called
mark,
the
we
Octo
won't
Grabber.
have ground
It'll
station
come out and
coverage
like
to
hug
confirm successful deployment
the like
until about T
the
plus
like
1
landing
hour
legs of the
and
rocket,
20 minutes.
and it'll
For
hold
those
it down
of you
in
that are
case they
interested, we'll keep
experience
the
like
audio
rough
only
seas.
countdown nets up on
There's
our
been a
YouTube
few times
channel,
where it's
and
come
then we'll
back
confirm successful
to
payload
land
deployment on our
with like
social
the
channels.
rockets all like
But that
on
is going
one
to be
side,
bringing
like kind
our
of
webcast
tipped,
to
or
a
it
close
looks like it
today.
got kind of
Thank
beat
you
up.
to the Range and Federal Aviation Administration for supporting today's mission. And of course, thank you to all of our viewers and all of our Starlink customers using our service at this time. Thanks for joining us for our 3rd and final launch of this week, and we will see you again soon.
Wow, 3 launches this week. That's crazy. All right, let's check out what NASA Spaceflight has to say.
Hauling over the Bahamas.
Yeah. Is it just
So you can
me?
see the strong back there that we saw earlier that went back a few degrees to let the rocket launch. Now it's going to make its way all the way down.
Overly surprising.
If you look up at the top of that tower there, you can see that little white and black arm. That's the crew access arm that they would use to access the Dragon capsule when they have manned launches.
We'll have to see if when that comes back into the port, it's still dead center in the circle like that. We've seen those.
Yeah, that
waves
was a
sort of
pretty good.
walk them
That was a
across
pretty
the deck some
dead center
as they
launch.
come back in. They're not always in the exact same position as when we see them land. So.
Sure enough, we'll have to keep
We
our
could
eyes
probably
on it.
jump
Hopefully
over
it
to
doesn't
play
do a
some
B-1069.
Minecraft Dungeons to wrap up the stream. So we're only at about 2 hours and 40 minutes. So thank you everybody who came to check out the SpaceX launch. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I will be cutting that specific segment of the stream out and making it a highlight video. For those of you who want to just watch that later, or you missed something, or you came in late, whatever. If you guys have any questions on the launch or anything about that, let me know.